Hey, what's going on, guys? So those of you who may have been around since the early days of this channel would remember a video I uploaded going over how Kindred Fates is not a Pokemon clone. In this video, I outline how Kindred Fates differentiates itself from Pokemon, and that Pokemon doesn't own the creature collecting or monster taming aspects of every game, despite the fact that it popularized the idea. That said, with Kindred Fates, it's quite easy to talk about the differences as it's a real-time combat-based game rather than that of a turn-based game. Despite this, it still baffles me how many people I've seen calling this the next Pokemon, Pokemon clone, a Pokemon ripoff, or whatever. This is mostly situated within Pokemon spaces, by which people may not know much about the monster taming genre and the differences that each game brings, but I've seen this with other games as well, who, despite being similar and obviously inspired by Pokemon, are just called ripoffs or clones in a very disrespectful manner. Now, I've seen the same type of comments being levied towards Monster Sanctuary. I will say to a lesser degree than some other games that I've seen, but this is sort of the recent talk of the town, if you will. As of such, this video aims to quash the idea that Monster Sanctuary is anything even close to a Pokemon clone, and in it we'll discuss Monster Sanctuary's system in contrast to Pokemon, and I think this logic can be applied to many other games within the genre as well. If you are a Pokemon fan watching this and haven't tried Monster Sanctuary or any of the other games within the genre, I highly recommend you do, and I'd like to welcome you to your first step down the monster taming rabbit hole. Now, in order to properly compare the games, we need some sort of understanding of what each game brings to the table in terms of their theme, and how the games actually play in comparison to one another. We'll start with Pokemon since most people already know what it's about, but basically, from a thematic perspective, Pokemon is all about exploring a modern region, which is semi-realistic in terms of how the world operates. If said world had these magical creatures within them, it's your goal as a kid or sometimes a young teenager to explore the region, collect some badges, fight the Elite Four, and become champion. Throughout the game, you'll encounter some bad people who you'll also need to stop, and somehow they'll have something to do with the legendary creature in one way or another. It's a simple premise and hasn't changed much since the game's conception, but it usually does the job just fine. Now, Monster Sanctuary, on the other hand, has you part of an important family dedicated to keeping the peace within the sanctuary. The sanctuary is not a fun, expansive region to explore like a tourist, but instead acts as a place for refuge for both people and monsters living within it. Said refuge was brought forth from the war between those in favor of the sanctuary and those against it. It's your job to investigate strange occurrences throughout the sanctuary, stop champion monsters that have been running amok, and ultimately prevent the summoning of an old evil. Throughout the game, you'll encounter a small group of alchemists that disagree with the way of life within the sanctuary, and it's your job to stop them. So with both games, you can see that while some similarities exist, for example, dealing with some bad people and bringing forth some sort of powerful being, but other than that, the entire theme is separate. One game has a focus on mostly relaxed and systematic competition, while the other has high stakes and you play more of a protector role. And yes, Pokemon does have high stakes scenarios, but Monster Sanctuary seems to have these high stakes at all times. The idea of the monsters themselves are also in contrast, where Pokemon are like your friends or your pets, and the monsters in the Monster Sanctuary are feral and can only be tamed by hatching one from an egg rather than catching it. So yeah, the way the story plays out is quite different, but what's more important is how the game actually plays, and this always baffles me because if you're gonna go after games that you think are too similar to Pokemon, at least go after some games that follow the same gameplay style. For example, while Temtem is great, and I do think it does enough to set itself apart, the gameplay and objectives are way more similar to Pokemon than a game like Monster Sanctuary. So at least when detractors go after a game like Temtem, it can establish an open debate to be had where we can actually talk about how these types of games differentiate themselves while still being similar. The thing with Monster Sanctuary, however, it plays just absolutely completely different. Like, there's not any semblance of the Pokemon playstyle in Monster Sanctuary whatsoever. If you watched the Monster Taming and Chill episode featuring the developers, you know that the lead developer only played a little bit of Generation 7, then one game from one of the old generations, I believe it was Gen 2. It can be seen throughout the game that while it has a monster taming foundation, the way attacks are learned, the way the combat plays out, the evolution mechanic, their version of shinies, the way held items work, etc. are completely different. Yes, some elements like having equipable items, turn-based battles, they're similar to Pokemon, but that's also also just an RPG thing. Pokemon didn't invent these mechanics or even popularize them when RPGs have existed well before Pokemon's time. So let's take a look at each major mechanic and compare. This will establish beyond any doubt that Monster Sanctuary is not a Pokemon clone and isn't even heavily inspired by Pokemon outside of the fact that there's monsters to be tamed. So I'm going to start by grossly oversimplifying the Monster Sanctuary battle system, but basically it features 3-on-3 battles, which is a mechanic that Pokemon had but then dumped, but the way the battles actually work is completely different. So firstly, there's no speed stat, so after choosing your attack, it goes off instantaneously, unlike how in Pokemon, you pick all your attacks and they sort of roll out in order. But more important than this is Monster Sanctuary's combo system, in which you'll want to chain your attacks in order to maximize damage. The idea is to build up as many hits as you possibly can, which increases your damage output, and then with your last monster, use your heaviest attack. On top of this, there are a ton of passive abilities to be had that go far beyond Pokemon's ability system, status conditions that can stack, and a ton of other factors that exist in battle. While the game's battle system isn't insanely varying, it dwarfs Pokemon in its complexity. That's not a jab at the way Pokemon does it. I think Pokemon's battle system is completely serviceable, but it's just a fact. Monster Sanctuary goes a different way with it. Now, a lot of what I've just mentioned also ties into the way attacks are learned. In Pokemon, you can learn certain attacks when you reach a certain level, or if you pay off a move tutor, or if you decide to breed. Monster Sanctuary, on the other hand, features a skill tree system similar to other RPGs. The idea behind this is that yes, at different levels you can unlock the capability to learn certain moves, but are required to have prerequisites, and you must manage your skill points, something you get each time you level up. Monsters can have several passive effects, like being able to stack buffs, causing automatic debuffs on the foes when certain conditions are met, resurrection, and more. This is a far cry from Pokemon's system, which allows for one ability and one status condition per Pokemon. To actually sit there and dissect these two systems and then come to the conclusion that one's a ripoff or a clone of the other is not only factually incorrect but also ignorant, because clearly anybody that would see these two games and call them the same hasn't actually taken the time to explore what the game has to offer, but instead made a false claim under the presupposition that the two games must be similar because they feature monsters. I've spoken to a plethora of the Monster Taming developers, and this seems to be a widespread issue regardless of how much certain games differentiate themselves from Pokemon. And it's honestly ironic because Pokemon might have popularized this genre, but other games like Shin Megami Tensei predate Pokemon. So to even call stuff Pokemon clones when yes, it popularized the genre but didn't invent it, is kind of asinine in my opinion. For me, the biggest takeaway is that yes, Pokemon is the biggest and most popular monster taming game ever, and probably will be forever. There's nothing wrong with calling a game Pokemon-like, Pokemon-inspired, etc., but when you call a game a knockoff or a clone, there's a negative connotation attributed to that, and all it does is invalidate the hard work of all these developers that just want to make monster taming games. I'm not sure if the source of this is just ignorance, and I want to delineate the fact that when I say ignorance, I don't mean rude. A lot of people seem to associate it with that. Ignorance means that you don't know something, you're uneducated. It's not necessarily a negative thing, you just don't know. It does become a negative thing when you use those uneducated or unfounded opinions to drive a specific narrative, in this case being that monster taming games are just Pokemon clones. So I think it's either rooted in ignorance or it's just self-conscious Pokemon fans that perhaps can't justify some of the decisions the company's been making and instead try to project that onto the other monster taming games, just shutting them down instantly without giving them a chance, because anything that dares to challenge Pokemon must be destroyed. Whichever way you slice it, I do think that it's time that people start to realize that monster taming games aren't going anywhere, and you can call these games clones all day long, but the fact is that they're here to stay whether you like it or not. So yeah guys, sorry if I seemed a little extra passionate in this video. This does really bother me when people's games get invalidated just because they're inspired by something else, and Pokemon seems to be the worst level of clone accusations that I've seen across gaming. I could be wrong, but this is the worst I've seen. With that said, let me know your guys' thoughts on this whole situation. If you think Monster Sanctuary is a Pokemon clone, I'd really like to see some valid argumentation that actually stems from a deep knowledge within the game rather than just at a first glance, because at the end of the day, you're not doing yourself or anyone else any favors by making baseless assertions. But yeah, if you guys did enjoy the video, as usual, make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at GymLeaderEd. Check out my subscriber Discord, all links in the description. Until next time, peace.